actually, this is Leadership Talk number 17 that we're offering. And just to give you a little preview, Pastor Nicholas has agreed to do a semi-series, and he's doing Leadership Talk number 18 in October. So we want you all to return and catch that one too. And my name is Jeannie Ward, one of the subcommittee that does this work. And I am privileged to be here with you this evening. It's always nice to be a host and see who shows up and listen to these great presentations. We are excited because Pastor Nicholas was here before in the Desert Southwest Conference area in Las Vegas and Nevada, but is back now after being in Georgia for a while. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a lead in, give you his bio. He says he's excited to be back in the Desert Southwest Conference. He was 3 years serving as a student pastor in the North Georgia Conference, and he attended the Candler School of Theology. He's a native of Las Vegas, attending University UMC, was active in the Boy Scouts and the district and the conference youth events through middle and high school. He has a BA in communication with a minor in leadership from the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. He has a master's of education and MED in college administration with a minor in communication from Oregon State University. And as of May, he has an MDiv with concentrations in scripture and interpretation and justice, peace building, and conflict transformation from Candler. He says he's a passionate educator. He works with people from 2 to 92. So he's particularly interested in the minor prophets and how they can be accessible in preaching and teaching for contemporary congregations. Currently serving as pastor at Hope UMC in Bullhead City, and he is working towards being commissioned as a provisional elder. The leadership talk that he's giving tonight is drawn from a book called Leadership for a Better World, Understanding Social Change Model of Leadership Development. And as I say at the end, we'll announce the title of the upcoming Leadership Talk number 18, which you will definitely not want to miss. So at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Pastor Nicholas Grainger.
Thank you, Jeannie, and thank you to the members of the subcommittee and the Clergy and Lay Leadership Development Committee. It's a joy and a privilege to be with you all and to be invited tonight. As Jeannie indicated, this presentation is largely drawn from this book, Leadership for a Better World. And I was reflecting on today being September 11th and recognizing the impact that has had on us all. Who doesn't want to live in a better world? I mean, isn't that what Christ and Christianity is all about? If kingdom work is not about a better world, I don't know what we're doing here. So that's the lens, that's the frame that I want us to keep in mind throughout this presentation. Not only is this model useful in thinking about how you show up as a leader in your systems and in your ecosystems, and how leadership dynamics might play out on a committee or within a local congregation, at some level, we must believe that we are leading for a better world. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen so we can have our graphics. I'm gonna read an opening prayer. This comes from Claudio Carvalhos's book, Liturgies from Below. Beautiful worship book collected from all over the global south and the developing world This is a prayer encourage courage to fight. Dear God, bless the oppressed with courage to fight. Bless us with courage to stand in solidarity with them and to work with them and for them. We pray for those who hear but cannot understand, those who see but cannot comprehend. May our solidarity with others give birth to justice and peace in the land and to the people. Amen. Now, I want to speak just a moment about leadership models and a word what I mean when I say that this is a leadership model, the social change model. We all operate with various models of leadership all the time in terms of what we think a leader does or how they act. Mostly it's learned unconsciously, something that we've picked up along the way. Very seldom do we get a chance to intentionally or critically examine our models. My hope by presenting you with a leadership model this month and a different leadership model in October is that it gives you two more examples of things to consider. You don't have to accept only one model or only one way of thinking about leadership. It's just another tool in the toolbox. This month, we're talking about the social change model, what we might describe as an environmental or a social model. It thinks about leadership as a process, really how the leader acts to create change. Next month, when we gather, we're going to be discussing the learning leaders model. And we'll see a model that is more about the personal characteristics of the leader, habits of the mind that we can grow and develop in ourselves, that good leaders approach the task of leadership as those seeking to learn, wanting to know more. In this model of leadership, it's about the performance of a task or the performance of a role of a leader. And at its core, it's a question of who the leader is and how they show up as an individual. Taken together, we have two very powerful models to consider our own brands of leadership. And of course, it's important to remember there's nothing in these models that's mutually exclusive. It would be a misapplication to say, oh, I only believe in the social change model, or I'm a learning leader and that's all I ever use, because leadership is always contextual. The last assumption that underlies both models and that is critical to my own thinking about leadership is that leadership can be learned. It is not set in stone. It's not a gift you either have or you don't. The field of leadership studies has largely moved away from the so-called great person model of leadership, which was the traditional way of thinking about leadership until about the 1960s or so. Consider the classic book, How to Make Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. He promoted a great person or trait-based model. His premise is if you do these specific things that are inspired by these great leaders in this specific way, you too can manipulate people to do what you want. It's not a helpful model. And I would guess that all of you are at least open to the assumption that leadership can be learned because, well, you're here tonight to learn and talk and think about leadership and wanting to be better leaders for the communities you are a part of. And so on some level, you already have this assumption baked in. I want to give you some background on where this particular model comes from and how it was developed. It was developed in 1993 at UCLA, and it was designed specifically for college undergraduate learning experience. Now, you may think, I'm not a college student, so there's nothing here for me. But speaking as someone who worked with college students before coming to ministry, there's absolutely overlap between the experiences of college students and congregational members, people like you. The other thing that I really appreciate about this model is the fact that because it was designed for college students, it's very accessible. It's not filled with a lot of technical jargon or complex formulas. It's easy to learn and it's easy to apply to the settings we already operate in to produce change. And you're going to get a chance to apply it later this evening. This model focuses on 7 core values that are essential in bringing about positive change, and they operate at 3 levels. So if you can keep those 11 things in mind, you're golden. There are 2 primary goals of the social change model that the developers identified: to develop greater self-knowledge, that understanding of one's own talents, values, and interests, especially as they relate to your capacity to provide effective leadership. And what the developers identified as leadership competence, the ability to mobilize oneself and others to serve and work collaboratively. We need to begin also with a definition of leadership. There are so many options that we could use to operationalize what we mean by leadership. I want to share mine with you, that leadership is an ethical act of inspiring others toward effecting positive change through the accomplishment of a common goal. Now, obviously, there's a lot we could unpack here, but there's a couple of key pieces that are worth mentioning. For me, leadership is about inspiring others. It's a motivation. It's not just being bossy or bullying others to do it your way. Leadership is about affecting positive change. And this is where the model of the social change model really influences my understanding of who and what a leader is. Accomplishment of a common goal is the last piece I want to talk about here. That leadership is about doing something. As we'll see in the assumptions on the next slide, we must be outcome oriented. Leaders help others do something, not just sit around maintaining the status quo. I also invite you to spend time thinking about what your definition of leadership is. What are those important elements that are critical for you? And this is not a homework assignment, but an opportunity for reflection that I invite you to. So let's talk about some of the key assumptions about leadership that are made in the social change model. The first assumption is that leadership is non-hierarchical. It allows for leaders who may not hold traditional roles of leadership, but rather want to make positive change. It says, in effect, that everybody can be a leader, not merely those sitting at the top of the pyramid. Leadership is collaborative in this model. Effective leadership is based on collective action and shared power. As I indicated before, this is a process orientation rather than a positional orientation to leadership. It's not the acts of an individual with authority, but how that individual influences those around them. Another key piece, and you saw this in my definition of leadership, is that leadership is values-based. It's ethical. Groups must be clear about their values and consistent with their actions. And lastly, change-oriented. Effective leadership involves being able to accomplish positive change for others and the community. Change is possible and often necessary in the systems that we are a part of to bring about a better world. So the question comes, do these assumptions hold true in the congregations that we all help lead? Well, let's think about it. Non-hierarchical. Is trustees or finance more powerful? Is it more important to be on SPRC or the church council? Can any one person just tell other committees what to do? Or are we all equally leaders that everyone can be invited to be a leader, even those who don't necessarily hold formal leadership roles? Do we need to collaborate to accomplish our goals? Lastly, if we understand leadership to be relationships of influence, are we leading from our Christian identities and from our own values, or from the values of broader culture? I indicated earlier that the social change model operates on three levels, or what we might call three perspectives of the model. And don't worry, all these slides will be available, and there's also a great graphic that you'll get to in a little bit. So you don't need to worry about writing all of this down. The first level is the individual. This is the development of those personal qualities, particularly self-awareness, and identifying what your core values, your personal values are. We must ask, what personal qualities are we attempting to foster and develop in our work? How are we helping people grow? And it's some of these questions at the individual perspective that we're going to talk more about in October. The second perspective, or the second level that the social change model operates at, is the group level. At this level, the emphasis is on collaboration and integration between group and individual. We can think about what processes do congregations and committee members need to learn in order to work effectively in groups? How can collaboration foster individual development and social change? Group work is hard, whether you experienced it in school or in church. It's hard work, and group formation is a hard process. There are stages of group development that every group goes through. And we can't assume that just because someone is a good church person, they know how to work in a group or work in a collaborative fashion. The last perspective, the last level of the social change model then, is the communal or societal level. When we think at this level, this is where we really identify change for the common good. We can operationalize this or see one example of this in the North District. About 15 years ago, maybe a little bit longer now, a group of concerned citizens, interfaith, multi-religious, got together and formed Nevadans for the Common Good. And you can already hear some of the social change model playing out. It's this common good piece. Their primary, or their initial, their initial reason for formation was concerned over human trafficking related to some of the conventions and sporting events that were coming to Las Vegas on a regular basis. In time, they expanded that focus to include not just human trafficking, but drug and other addiction and overdose deaths in Southern Nevada, and working at multiple levels with city, county, and state leaders to change laws, to craft policies, to establish the community and the kingdom of God that they wanted to make tangible. And so I think this is a really great example of faith leaders who invited others into the process. So starting at the individual, moving into the group, into the communal level, faith leaders inviting others into the process to change for the common good. I also said that there were 7 core values of the social change model. I'm going to give you a screen that kind of shows all of them, and then we're going to break them down each individually as well. At the individual perspective, or the individual level, there are 3 of these core values, and all of these core values start with the letter C for simplicity: consciousness of self, congruence, and commitment. At the group level, We talk about collaboration, common purpose, and controversy with civility. At the communal or societal level, we talk about citizenship. All of this produces a bonus 8th C, which is change. So I want to unpack each of these one by one a little bit and give a definition. At the individual perspective or the individual level, we have consciousness of self, and that's really the self-awareness piece, right? Being aware of the beliefs, values, attitudes, and emotions that motivate you to take action as a leader, and also how you why you've become a leader, how you become a leader, how you show up as a leader, that real self-awareness piece. Congruence then is not only being aware of, but really understanding and being consistent with your values, beliefs, strengths, and limitations. There's also this commitment piece. This is the psychic energy that motivates you as the individual to serve as a leader, and it drives the collective effort forward. There's a sense of passion or intensity, maybe duration, that's directed both towards the group activity and the intended outcomes, that this is something you care about, that you're committed to. The group perspective, group level, we talk about collaboration. This is the group process. It's relational. It transcends individual goals and interests and behaviors to set group goals, group interests, and group behaviors. At this point, it's vital that group members explore differences in individual values, ideas, affiliations, visions, and their identities. All of this is a negotiation between the participants of the group. The common purpose, sharing, working with shared aims and values. The difference between collaboration and common purpose seems slight at first, but one way to think about common purpose is it's best achieved when all members of the group share in the vision. Collaboration might be how that vision is formed, and then common purpose is everyone buying in, would be a kind of a convenient differentiation between the two. Lastly, controversy with civility, which I could give an entire presentation on just that alone, which seems to be so missing in our polarized and divisive time. One of the key things that the book authors really dive into in this chapter is that it requires a high degree of trust among group members to have controversy with civility. Conflict is inevitable in humanness, and conflict needs to be resolved, but also must be integrated into the common purpose and not allowed to sidetrack the group. How many times have we all been in a committee meeting that has dissolved into a shouting match because we forgot how to have controversy with civility? Well-meaning people will, and probably should disagree about a lot of things a lot of the time, but how we relate to each other in this group level defines how successful we are in affecting social change. Lastly, at the community level, or the communal societal level, we have just one C this time: citizenship. This is about civic responsibility, not simply membership, but engagement in a community. In some places, especially in churches, we might talk about this as second hour membership, where it's not just attendance of the worship service itself, but an additional hour during the week, whether it's Sunday school or serving on a leadership team, serving on a conference committee, task force, some other ministry where you're giving of your time. Second hour discipleship, it's sometimes called in the church world. And so citizenship is really about our engagement beyond the group that we have identified with. It's important to note that the practices of good citizenship should and need to happen at every level of the model, that we are engaged actively and not just showing up. All of this produces our bonus 8th C, which is change. This is the ultimate goal of leadership in this model, is producing a positive social change. It's believing in the importance of making a better world and a better society for oneself and those around you. It's believing that individuals, groups, and communities have the ability to work together to make that change. One of my favorite quotes is, "Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can make a change. Indeed, they are the only ones who ever have." I promised a graphic, and so here it is. And I apologize, Laura, that you're not able to see this beautiful graphic that I've created. Actually, I didn't create, I borrowed this one from a friend. But we see that these three perspectives are not hierarchical, but again, relationally placed, and that they interact with each other. I don't know if you can see my mouse here, interact with each other and one another at each of the juncture points, producing this central change in the middle. So before we move to our kind of activity and discussion point, I know that was a lot of information, kind of a broad strokes overview of the model, but I want to stop here and invite conversation. If you have questions about this model or things that you noticed or were thinking about as we were going through.
You have something, Nicholas.
Yeah.
Yeah. In leading a team or a committee, I think that all of these points could be, as the new year starts and new people come on to your team, we could review all of this as they come on and get that actual foundation, which is what it would be, where they all agree to work on each level and let them know that's why they're there and that's what's expected. I just see that it's very useful in starting the new year, especially with that coming up, um, you know uh, in a team, so that it's not clear what your purpose is, or what your steps could be. I just think it's a really good stepping stone to, and a foundation to starting your team on the right foot.
Absolutely. And I can tell a story to illustrate that exact point, Jeannie. When I worked in higher education at Gonzaga University, in the fall, at the beginning of the school year, we had our student club kickoff event. And every year, every person who had been selected as a leader for a student club or organization went to this kickoff. And it included partly this training and introducing this model and getting these student leaders to think about their clubs and organizations, their student activities they were involved in. And we did it every year, so that by the fourth year, by their senior year, they'd seen this presentation 4 times and they're like, oh yes, I know how to do this. And it was a good refresher after the summer away, and creating a culture of leadership where the leadership is shared and plentiful, and not just those particular students who were defined as leaders by the organizational charter. We could think about it with charge conference season coming up, of those people who are going to be nominated by the Committee on Lay Leadership that the pastor chairs, what used to be called the Nominations Committee, and thinking about how are we training and preparing leaders at all levels of our organizations, from the worship committee to our administrative councils to our jurisdictional and general church bodies. that's one of the things that I like about this model, is that it's scalable to a variety of sizes of organizations. So I think you're right. It's a great way of kicking off either a new team or a team that has new members as it reforms and people roll off and new people roll on. Absolutely a great model for that.
So I've used this particular model before, or I use it all the time now. I'm with another volunteer organization, large volunteer organization, that when we bring members into our organization, they apply for different positions. And it's wonderful because you as the leader get to find out about them, and you get to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the most important part about being a leader, is listening. And then you can guide them with their gifts, with the questions, the way they answer the questions. I think it's an awesome tool to use.
Thanks, Jane Ann. And I think, if we wanted, we could even talk about how that listening piece is both an individual value and functioning at the group level, that collaboration piece, and sorting it out, negotiating between group members, their interests and needs and capacities. And there are other parts of this model that are confusing or surprising to people, or that want to flush out a little bit more before I put you in your breakout groups?
I appreciated your example of Nevadans for the Common Good. It is continuing here in the North District, and it is still ecumenical. And the cycle is similar to what Jeannie was suggesting, that each of the membership organizations are encouraged to have a core group of people within the congregation or the nonprofit. And that needs to be refreshed, so that new leaders are coming in. So they go through the training, and we're in that process right now. In fact, tomorrow they've got another one scheduled for how to recognize leaders in your congregation. One of their tools points out what Jane Ann was sharing, is it's relational, and they one of their key tools is the one-on-one opportunity to get to know people and find out what their passions are and what they're looking to have happen. So yeah, it's nice to see that it kind of blends together. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Lorna, for that. I'm going to go back to my shared screen for a moment. In this graphic, we see that it's highly relational, and this is not part of the book itself. This is not a Christian book. It was developed at UCLA. It's used at state schools, secular institutions, not just congregations. But I am working on my commission paperwork, and so I've been thinking about my theology. There's something very Trinitarian about this model, right? That all three levels are functioning all of the time, interrelated to one another to produce an outcome. And if any of you are on the Board of Ordained Ministry, you'll see it on the paper. But I really like that it is a relational, and it is both relational and process oriented as a model, that it's about the outcome, but also how we get there. I want to take a couple of minutes, and I'm going to send you to your breakout rooms, and I'm going to ask you to serve as leadership consultants with each other. One of the things, as I said at the beginning, is that this is a very approachable model, that it's not very complicated, there's not a lot of jargon, and so I think you're able to intuitively grasp it and even see it for yourselves. So I'm going to ask you, what part of them in your small groups, and you'll have 2 or 3 people in your rooms, what part of the model has seemed most relevant to your congregation lately? What part of the model has seemed most challenging for your congregation lately? And what does the congregation need to do differently to enact the desired change? So those are 3 questions that I'm going to have you think about and it may not be your congregation. Maybe you want to think about your committee if you're on trustees or finance or SPRC. Maybe you want to think about your ministry, um, or but I want you to think about it really at a personal level here, and what parts of the model seem particularly relevant, particularly challenging, and what might need to be done differently. And we're going to put these into the chat. And Alberta, if you will go ahead, and I'm going to stop share, if you will go ahead and put people into some breakout rooms. And we'll bring you back in about 10 minutes for some debrief. Well, welcome back. I hope those breakouts were some productive conversations, or at least interesting opportunities to try and start applying this to your own settings and thinking about things that connected or things that you wanted to probe more deeply. In our group, Lana brought up, we spent a lot of time talking about controversy with civility and the challenges that communities face, even at the denominational level. I just came from North Georgia. There's a lot of disaffiliations that are happening there. And that Lana correctly pointed out that I had said that this requires trust between the group members. And so often that is the missing critical ingredient, that without that trust, we pretend to be nice. We have faux civility. We have, I don't know, Midwest nice is what we used to call it, where it's nice, but not really. It's nice, but it's not kind, maybe we'll say. And so without that trust, without that vulnerability, because that's what trust really is. It's the willingness to be vulnerable, and to disagree, but do so in a kind and a loving way. Was there any other reflections that came out of the large or your breakout groups that you wanted to bring back to the large group? I'm not seeing any.
All I could say is what I'm hearing, and is that people are going to use this model. They're excited to have the points that you've made, and definitely excited to use your model. So I think that's amazing.
Not my model.
Well, the model you presented tonight, I mean, just the making sure that they know those guidelines, and it's great. Thank you.
I'm going to go back to my presentation here, because I do have 2 last slides that I want to share with you. So first, I created playlists because I'm of that generation. So there are 2 playlists here on YouTube. One is youtube.com/@playingforchange. And the second one is on my personal YouTube account @pastorin.grainger. And just some great collection of curated music that I think gets people into this social change mindset. When I've done this presentation in person, I frequently have these playing in the background during the breakout sessions as people are talking, just to kind of implant the idea. Playing for Change actually is a multinational collaborative art and music project where they have musicians and singers and bands from all over the world playing the same songs, and then they stitch them together in the videos. It's really cool. So that's just a resource when you want to put some music on in the background. Those would be suggestions. I want to close with a blessing from John O'Donohue, the Irish poet and mystic, from his book To Bless the Space Between Us. It's entitled For a Leader. May you have the grace and wisdom to act kindly, learning to distinguish between what is personal and what is not. May you be hospitable to criticism. May you never put yourself at the center of things. May you act not from arrogance, but out of service. May you work on yourself, building up and refining the ways of your mind. May those who work for you know you see and respect them. May you learn to cultivate the art of presence in order to engage with those who meet you. When someone fails or disappoints you, may the graciousness with which you engage be their stairway to renewal and refinement. May you treasure the gifts of the mind through reading and creative thinking, so that you continue as a servant of the frontier, where the new will draw its enrichment from the old, and you never become a functionary. May you know the wisdom of deep listening, the healing of wholesome words, the encouragement of the appreciative gaze, the decorum of holding dignity, the springtime edge of the bleak question. May you have a mind that loves frontiers, so that you can evoke the bright fields that lie beyond the view of the regular eye. May you have good friends to mirror your blind spots. May leadership be for you a true adventure of growth. I hope that you receive this blessing. Thank you for joining me and spending part of your evening with me. Jeannie, I turn it back over to you and the Committee for Clergy and Lay Leadership Development.
Thank you so much, Pastor Nicholas. This has been a true blessing, and I want to encourage everybody to re-register now for the October 9th Leadership Talk. And of course, this is going to be Pastor Nicholas giving us another leadership view on more the personal side. Is that right, Pastor Nicholas? Right.
Correct. Yes.
The approach, more of a personal approach. So it's called Learning Leaders, a Leadership Model. God bless. We do thank you so much.